This is it. This is it. The podcast, My Road Trips Planner. Hey, my name is Shane. Welcome. If you're looking for a podcast that talks about road trips, you found it right here, right now. So, have you ever thought about, how long it takes to get somewhere? So, I want to talk about time because I think a lot of, I just put out a 1 minute video with 1 minute with Shane on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And the thing I always come to acknowledge is that I think when people think, they put an address into Google, right? And you're sitting there and you're like, okay, so I'm gonna go to this place and this is where I'm going. And so we'll use the example that I used in a short video. And what I said was, there's a difference between travel time and drive time. And so drive time is the amount of time you're actually in the car driving, which when you put an address in Google, which from Connecticut to Orlando, Florida, it says it takes about 18 hours. So you're at 18 hours and you're thinking, okay, so it's going to take me 18 hours to get to Orlando. Well, that's not exactly what's going to happen, because you have to think about brakes. You have to think about getting gas, because there's no way for you to drive from Connecticut to Orlando, Florida, if you're going to have to stop for gas, essentially. And you may have to stop to grab a bite to eat, or even if you have snacks, or, to drive 18 hours straight is really hard. And you may have to stop and take a rest. You just never know. It's just something that happens. And so one of the things I've come to realize is that to always calculate my travel time with my drive time. Now, if we decide to go to Mystic Seaport or Mystic Aquarium for the day, it's probably going to take us an hour to get there. Now, the travel time might actually be 1 hour, because essentially we might all be able to sit in the car for 1 hour. Now the thing is when you come to 2 hours or 3 hours, by then you're going to have to probably stop and stretch and move around. I've gone maybe 3.5 to 4 hours, and that's pushing it. That's really taking, the gas, everything to, not to the limit, but for a while. And you're still going to have to fill up. And so one of the things I've come to realize is that I need to know what my total travel time is and my drive time. So whatever I put in Google, and Google tells me, hey, it's going to take you 18 hours to get to Orlando, Florida. So that's great. But you have to remember that if you have a family, one of the biggest things you're going to come to realize is that you have to eventually stop and take a rest. And that's probably within 2 or 3 hours. And a lot of times maybe you can push 3 hours. Maybe your kids fall asleep, works out really good. Things seem to work out. But you have to understand this. So, if you take 3 hours, right? And you say to yourself, okay, so the next time I'm going to have to stop, that's within 6 hours of driving time. The next time's 9. Now you're at 3 stops, 12 hours, that's 4 stops. And then 15 hours is 5 stops. And then at 18 hours, you're talking about probably 6 stops you're going to have to take, essentially. And give or take, maybe you only last for 2.5 hours one time. You just never know. And so you have to think about where you're going to have to stop 6 times now. If you have a family and there's multiple people, you're probably going to be there for at least 30 minutes, right? So now you're at 30 minutes per stop. We'll take 30 minutes. Quick stop. We're grabbing a bite to eat. We're grabbing gas, and we're getting back on the road. And we're just stretching real quick. So you're at 30 minutes. So now you're talking another, about 4.5 hours. I mean, yeah, you're essentially adding 4.5 hours per stop. So if you decide, let's see, so 30 minutes at 3 hours, right? So now you've added a half an hour. That's 3.5 hours. Now you're at the second stop is 6 hours. Now you've added an hour essentially. So now you are at, 7. Now you're at 7 hours. And then on top of that, now you're going to another. So all these stops are coming up. And so let's say you were able just to squeeze in 5 stops, right? Well, 5 stops is, let's see. So you have 5 stops at 30 minutes each. So that's 2.5 hours, right? But you come to realize that you're going to probably have to stop what if you have to stop 2 more times? Just in case. You just never know how the hours work or anything like that. And so now you've come to the realization that, you're adding an extra 2 to 4 hours of travel time, your break time into your travel time. And so let's just say you're at 22.5 hours. Let's just pick a number now. And so now you're at 22.5 hours. Also, what about construction? What about delays? Things like that. And so now you're going to be like, okay, well, let's just say 24 hours, right? Let's just say our total travel time is going to take 24 hours. And so now you have to sit there and think, okay, if I'm at 24 hours, now I have to come to a place where I am essentially, is this a 1-day travel or is this 2 travel days? And so if you have kids, you're going to have to probably break it up into 2 travel days, because now you're looking at 12 hours each. So a day. And you really, your kids, for kids, so I have kids. Your kids aren't going to want to sit in the car for 12 hours, but you can try to make it more accessible. And this is where I'm going to break it down a little bit more, is that now you're at, so let's say you leave at 6 a.m., right? 12 hours would be 6 p.m. So you decide, okay, well, we're going to get to our first destination at 8 p.m. That's 14 hours, but just bear with me. You decide in the middle of the day to let your kids run around, take a really long break. Let's say another hour break here, and then you put in another hour break at another time. Now it gets your kids to run around, stretch, gets you to stretch, things like that. Now you're at, it's a 14-hour, now you're at it. So it's essentially going to be 28 hours if you do 2 days. But what you've come to realize is that you might have to break things up, because when you're traveling more than one person, I think you've come to the realization that everybody's different. Some people, if you don't have an RV, some people are going to have to go to the bathroom at different times. Everybody's like, I'm just going to say, everybody's bladder is different. And sometimes you have to realization that, oh, wow, like everybody's body's not on the same page. That you stop one time, an hour later, when your kids is like, I got to go so bad. Please just pull over. It doesn't even matter. I just got to go pee. And this happens, and this is what part of traveling is. And you have to realize these things, because I think what happens is a lot of times, and it happened for me. I remember we were driving to Pennsylvania, and one of the hardest things I think that hit me was understanding that, little kids are just different. And I knew they were different, but having to go to the bathroom multiple times. They might have to, an adult might have to go to the bathroom once or twice during, a couple hours. But a kid might need to go 3 or 4 times. And so you have to be prepared for these things. And so I always say to myself, always give yourself a little bit of cushion. Because if you're going on a trip and you want to have a good time, leave yourself some cushion. Because the problem is that if you're trying to rush from one place to the other so quickly, so fast. So this is something I think about. If you want to go to Florida for the week, right? And you have kids and you're going to drive down there. The first thing you want to think about is this. Number 1, your kids are going to want to stop multiple times, and they're kids. They're going to need to move around. So if you spread things out, so let's say you're going to Florida for the week, right? It's going to be at least 2 traveling days. But if your kids have a really hard time in the car, you may want to do 2.5 days. Now you might be like, hey Shane, like that's a lot of time to travel. I understand that. But this is the thing. you're giving yourself, let's say you're giving yourself 7 days, right? So we'll say it's a Saturday to the following Sunday. So that might actually be 8 days. So you leave on a Saturday, you're traveling on a Saturday, Sunday, and you get there halfway on Monday, right? And so when you're there halfway on Monday, you see some sites that aren't too crazy. You don't want to do too much that day because your kids might need to rest up. You might need to rest up. Who knows? Now, the next step is now you have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, right? You want to do stuff. So Tuesday, you have 3 days. You get to decide, what are we going to do in this 3 days? You decide, we're going to Disney World for one day and we're going to go to Universal for another, right? Maybe on Tuesday you decide, hey, we're going to go to Disney on Tuesday. Wednesday, we're just going to hang around. Maybe we'll go shopping. Maybe we'll stay by the pool. And then Thursday, go to Universal. Now, I know a lot of people might be like, hey, Shane, like, I feel like I'm wasting a lot of time. I totally understand. You know, when we went to Disney World, we learned something very quickly. We pack too much stuff into every day. We try to go to 2 parks sometimes. We would try to make it somewhere. And I remember a friend of mine, they decided that they were going to take breaks during the time they were there. And I think that's the smartest thing. And I've come to realize too that we might only need 3 days instead of 7 days in Florida altogether. And so now, Friday, you drive back, Saturday, and then you end up at home Sunday morning. And what's great about Sunday afternoon, really, so Sunday midday, you're home because we've traveled back from Orlando, Florida to Connecticut. And so now you can sit down and say, hey, you know what? We can wash our clothes. We can take our time. We can make sure the kids get to bed at a good time, reasonable time, because they may have school in the morning. And so these are things that I start to think about when I'm traveling, is that if you have kids, you want to give them the ability to bounce back. Because if you don't, what happens is that your vacation, it can become really tough. And now you've come to the situation where you might have kids whining more. I'm not saying your kids aren't going to say something or start whining. I can't promise that. But what I can say is that if you spread things out and make them more tolerable for kids, then it actually helps the kids bounce back. And so that's something I've learned a lot, is that, you know, we're planning on going to Mystic. It's an hour away. And so we're only going for like 2.5 days. And one thing I've really come to think about is that I want to be patient with my children. So we're going to spread things out. We're not going to always just jump on things or just do things all the time. We're going to go to the aquarium because we have the yearly pass. We have the membership for the year. So we'll go see that. We might go to another park, but we're really going to try to be focused on really making sure we're not just squeezing everything in. And I get it. I'm the type of person that wants to squeeze everything in. Now, when I go on trips with my buddy, John Chambriello, the Connecticut wedding singer, if you're looking for a wedding singer, he actually, when we go on, we might drive for a while. We might be like, hey, look, we're driving all day to get to the next place, because we're both adults and we can make that decision and we know how to bounce back. Now, for kids, that's a little bit different. And I know I'm really focusing on kids today, and that's because I understand what it is to have a family. And so, and being able to give space for my children to be able to enjoy this trip or this vacation all together. So, travel time is your total travel time. Drive time is the amount of time you drive in the vehicle. So like travel time will add things to it. We add stops, we add getting gas, we also add that there might be delays or construction going on. And so those are things to be prepared for. So at the end of the day, when you're preparing for your trip, make sure you calculate your stops, because you want to be able to really plan thoroughly and make sure everybody is on the same page, that we're going to stop, we're going to take rest, because we're going to have a good time on this road trip. Hey, my name is Shane. The road's open. Let's drive.